Thank you very much for joining us. This is our regular deep dive into the world of marketing. We run these sessions every 5 or 6 weeks. And for those that don't know me or not met before, and you're new perhaps to Pimento, huge welcome. My name's Stephen Knight. I'm the CEO of Pimento. We run an agency network of around 175 consultants and agencies, many of whom hopefully are on today's call. We boast 97 different marketing disciplines, and we help brands both here in the UK and around the world. We're going to be recording the session today, so please turn on your camera, smile throughout, and remember to use the chat box to ask any questions of our panel. As always, I want to try and make this session as interactive as possible. Today, our subject matter is about the ever-changing role of the CMO, whether it be full-time, interim, or fractional. We'll be looking at all today. We selected an experienced panels of CMOs, all of whom have worked both full-time and in interim roles, covering a multitude of different positions in a variety of different sectors. Our speakers are Jeremy Hemmings, who until very recently was the Interim CMO of Entain. Jeremy has spent more than 25 years in the world of marketing, latterly at M&C Saatchi, where he was the Chief Client Officer. During this time, he ran accounts for some of the most iconic brands in the business, including BMW, British Airways, Pernod Ricard, Renault, Dixon's, Direct Line, and Reuters, as well as complex government businesses such as the Department of International Trade in the run-up to Brexit. Jeremy set up his own brand consultancy, Hurley Burley Partners, in 2018, and he's enjoyed a variety of successful strategic and creative projects since then. Since April of last year, he turned his client side into an interim CMO of Entain. For those that don't know Entain, they're one of the largest gaming businesses in the world. They own the Ladbrokes, Coral, Bwin, Gala, and Foxy brands in the UK and Europe, and they're based out in lovely Gibraltar. And he's been responsible for their budget, or marketing budget, of some £340 million and 100 plus people in their marketing department. So he's got a lot of relevant and up to the minute experience. And he's very much obviously been at the sharp end in the last year, and obviously it's been a very useful opportunity for him to sort of see how the world of the CMO has evolved. On the other side of the coin, we've got Russell White, who's the founder of FutureWork. Russell began working within the marketing and advertising industries in 1986. He's worked with all the major advertising networks as well as the majority of the FTSE 250 companies, identifying key hires for the marketing teams. He's also worked agency side, building a team of account handlers and data specialists as head of talent acquisition for a sizable CRM agency. And he's searched and hired obviously a number of full-time and interim CMOs in his time and continues to do so. Susie Moore is the founder of BrandRock. She's a distinguished marketing leader with extensive experience in brand development, strategic partnerships, and integrated marketing. And notable achievements include her tenure at the O2, where she was head of brand 2000 to 2009, and she spearheaded the launch of the iconic O2 Arena in London. She's also served as EVP of Global Brand at Sage and Brand and Partnership Director at Travelopia. So a wide variety of different experience in different sectors. Leslie Davey is the Global Brand Director for the Macallan, arguably Scotland's finest single malt whisky. She's normally based in Glasgow. She's with us here in Edinburgh today. And she's worked in a variety of different marketing roles, both full-time and interim, for some of the world's leading brands, including Diageo, Unilever, the Coca-Cola Company, IHG, Britvic, Barclaycard, and Night Timber. She's also lived and worked in 6 countries and speaks 4 languages, completed her first degree in Brazil, and has then gone on to complete her MBA and 3 postgraduate certificates with a specific focus on innovation strategies and sustainability. So there you have it. We've got an august panel here to answer any questions you might have today. Whether you are currently in a client side CMO role, whether you are on the agency side, whether you are looking to actually go into doing interim CMO type activities, this session's been designed for you. So please do take the opportunity to ask our panel any questions as we go through it. So let me get going. It's my contention that the role of the CMO has never been more important or indeed challenging, with an ever-widening range of responsibility and an ever-evolving number of channels and marketing disciplines that you need to master. Now, at a personal level, it's been 7 years since my last CMO role, which was at SSC plc. And in that time, obviously, marketing has had a huge amount to deal with. We had a pandemic, the odd war, economic recession, significant legislative changes in data use, and obviously the ever-shrinking marketing budget. At a time when arguably marketing's had to basically demonstrate its return on investment, all the activities that we currently get involved in, I feel that we have inadequate tools and methodologies in place to be able to actually support the hapless CMO. And one of the things that I think we should sort of delve into today is actually our relationship with the executive board, how CMOs actually engage and work with the board and other stakeholders in the organizations that they're part of. And increasingly how they perform is measured up in the same way as perhaps the CFO is. If we look at actually how things are evolving, particularly with AI, and it obviously brings huge numbers of opportunities and fresh challenges at the same time, I really feel that marketing leaders are up against it. A Gartner survey, which was published earlier this year, found that 71% of CMOs believe they lacked insufficient funds to be able to execute their strategies. Added to which, a piece of research that came out a few weeks ago suggested that the average tenure of a CMO is getting shorter at around 17 months. And part that's a consequence that we're seeing in terms of the rise of interim roles, but I also wonder if anything else is happening there. So that's the background. What's to be done? I'd like now, if I may, to turn the first question of today's panel. May I start with you, Leslie, if you don't mind? Can you help us a little bit? That's the sort of kind of pin down. How do you define the role of a modern day CMO, Leslie?
Morning, everyone. I think that what we need to reflect first of all, Stephen, is the changing nature of the trading environment and the fact that in the last 10 years, we've experienced a lot of turbulence even before COVID. And then COVID arrived and we had to prove to everyone our degrees of adaptability and flexibility. And that is a theme that I think has become a constant now, the ability to learn quickly, to adapt, not just about the external elements of the marketing environment, the changing consumer behaviors, the fact that marketing is completely digital and socially led now. And you have a changing consumer profile with Gen Zs, Gen Ys, and millennials all behaving in different and somewhat unpredictable ways. So the way that the CMO role is changing for me is that adaptability is an absolute need. Flexibility, the way that you deal with external factors and internal factors with the changing workforce as well, and increasing demand of the CMO that goes well beyond your traditional marketing responsibilities, but also a financial and a commercial element that become much more apparent with the pressures of the external environment and the increased competitiveness of all categories across all markets.
And do you see that obviously in different organizations where you've worked, that there's a recognition and understanding of that role at the C-suite level?
I think that there are no boundaries nowadays for what a CMO does. If I think about when I first started my career, that marketing was very well defined in terms of brand marketing and operations and activations. Nowadays, you kind of morph into making financial decisions and have a much greater involvement of what is happening in operations. So I think that the way that the role has evolved is that it has become much more all-encompassing. It has moved from a very functionally driven set of responsibilities to a much more general management scope of the role.
Thank you. Can I bring in Jeremy? Because obviously you've just had a recent experience, and obviously it's been a while, perhaps you've been client side in an interim role. Tell me, when you started that role over a year ago now, did you have a clarity actually from the management as to how they saw the role of the CMO and what the expectations were?
Good morning, everyone. To a degree, I agree with everything Liz just said. It used to be far more simple and straightforward, didn't it, in the old days? And there's huge complexity and huge flex, and the role of CMO has been around for a long time. But over the last few years, you also have CIOs and CTOs and CSOs and and huge amount of blur when it comes to what are the boundaries of the CMO's responsibilities and what the inputs are from other people like the chief technology officer or the information officer, strategy officer, or the brand director, or the performance marketing director. So it's got far more complex overall. And to directly answer your question, when I arrived at Entain, no, there wasn't complete clarity. So I needed to, and one of the big issues, which are underlying, I think, the precept of your question, is there isn't probably enough clear job design around the specific role and responsibility of a CMO. So me moving into Entain, which is a pretty brutal, ruthless organization, which is very commercially focused, I needed to know, is it a strategic role, is it a commercial role, or is it an enterprise role? And I think those are the three distinct roles you have as a CMO. It was largely, I discovered quickly, a commercial role. So rather than me having input to the nature of the propositions that we were required to sell or have a view on the product positioning overall, it's more a case of implementing the marketing budget to sell hard to achieve a short-term return. So very much a commercial marketing director function. My battles were about trying to elevate my position, so I had a voice around the table on the broader, longer-term strategic challenges, and and I was successful in some regard, and other ways I wasn't. There's always that tension between the here and now and the short-term returns, particularly an organisation like Entain, which is going through the mill at the moment, and the longer-term brand good. So that's, I suppose, my clear answer to that question. There wasn't clarity. I tried to create clarity, and you never achieve ultimate success. There are wins. The key thing is understanding who the stakeholders are, who will make a decision on this, who you need to include and who you don't need to include. So it's a lot of people management stuff, a lot of stakeholder management in order to try and progress the brand and marketing agenda that I wanted to buy into.
Russell, can I come to you? Because obviously you're at the other end, you're taking the briefs from these clients. How often do you feel you actually get a really clear brief as to what they're looking for when it comes to word CMO?
Good morning, everyone. I think sum it up in one word, rarely is probably how I would describe it. I think that, well, certainly from my perspective, what I have to do is really understand what the objective of the CMO, what they are anticipating the objective of the CMO to do. As Jeremy pointed out, I think there are potentially three elements of a position. And often what you may find is that it's a combination to one degree or another of all three. So what I find is what one has to do is understand who they have relationships with, both at the C-suite and and who are all the other stakeholders, how much influence they have on third parties who are engaged with the organization as well, and whether their objective is very much around sort of increasing shareholder value or increasing the customer base, or indeed retaining the customer base. So it's getting under the skin of how the business actually operates and what its main objectives are, and that will determine the type of CMO that organization potentially requires.
The supposition there is that there are different types of CMOs to fit obviously these different roles. That if we go back to what Leslie said a minute ago, inevitably to be a successful CMO, you need to be able to actually cover all of those areas. Inevitably, there'll be areas that you have more experience and from a personality point of view excel in, but you need to be able to touch all those bases. You spoke about the customer there. I'm going to go back to Susie, if I may. Susie, good morning. How are you?
Hi there. Hi, everyone. Good, thank you.
Good. Yeah, obviously, you've had a number of different roles within the current company you're working with Sage. And your experience and as a former CMO and head of brand, etc. When it comes to the customer experience, which we just sort of touched on the customer a second, how you ensure as a CMO alignment between the marketing functions and the operational delivery of that experience, be it the customer service teams or online, offline? who owns the customer increasingly in a large organization like Sage?
I mean, the obvious answer is that everyone owns the customer in terms of customer experience, because it's clearly every single touch point. But and Sage and many organizations and big global organizations are generally more, or quite often more, product-led than marketing and customer-led. And I think that's one of the challenges of marketing, and a key challenge and skill of the CMO. So I agree the CMO has different roles, and it will be dialed up or down depending on the organization and the culture and objectives. But I think the one thing that the CMO, the role it should always have in common, is be that customer champion and voice of the customer. You may sometimes have a chief customer role. You may sometimes have a really focused CEO that's customer focused, but a really good strategic marketeer should be the lead, I think, the leader and champion of the customer across the business. And I suppose I think there's two things that really make a difference. One is buy-in, and that from the top, from the C-suite and the CEO. And that's a cultural thing in terms of being customer driven. And I've been in organizations that are truly customer focused, and that is brilliant, and others that aren't, and it's just a struggle. And it depends on the organization, clearly, and the leadership. And the second is process, and having a joined up process and good relationships where the CMO really needs to be, best friends in partnership with the service, with customer services, but not just customer services, with the leaders of operations, product development, technology, data, whatever it may be, because it has to, the CMO role has to inspire and lead the best possible customer experience and learn from the insights from everyone. So it really has to be joined up, but I think they are the key champion and lead in an ideal business.
Thank you very much. I mean, that brings me on back to you, Jeremy, if I may. If we Entain as a business, it's very data and digitally driven. You're limited, I guess, as a CMO to what you can do in terms of how you can achieve that experience online through your apps, etc. How, in the 12 months you've been there, how are you seeing the role evolving, given obviously the pressures that there are to increasingly digitize the experience and to obviously mine and use your data in a way that both conforms to legislation, but at the same time is aligned to the brand experience?
That's a good question. Really, there's always going to be a tension between the short term and the long term. It's delivering data for commercial return now versus the long term brand health for future gain and future differentiation in the market, in a very clustered market. One of the key things is now they're finding their new permanent CMOs understanding what the reporting structure is. If the performance marketing director reports into the CMO, the CMO has some control over where the majority of the budget is spent. A rule of thumb, you'd think that it's usually 60% spend on brand, 40% performance. At Entain, it's the other way around. So it's more like 60-40 skewed towards performance marketing, because performance marketing is the machine which powers short-term return. So if that person reports into the CMO has his hands or her hands on the data. So that's one point to be made. There's clarity needs to be achieved around those role splits. So that's one point to make. The other thing is that we haven't talked much about insight. One thing I did while I was there I was there while a new insight director was hired, and I worked very closely with him to establish more of a fact-based around the softer brand measures, which can create influence internally with stakeholders around the brand, longer-term brand journey. The key thing is understanding in a short space of time which battles to pick, because there are too many to have an impact over the short term. As you said, the average tenure of a marketing director is as low as 18 months now. I was only there for a year. I was thinking, well, what can I actually do now to get results now versus put in place for a longer term gain? Your questions around data is don't make data an enemy, be in control of the data, understand the reporting lines, use the data derived from insight in market as a way of promoting the brand agenda alongside the machinery and the science of the performance marketing agenda. If that makes sense.
No, it does. I mean, and Leslie, in your space, obviously, you've got two audiences. You've got obviously, the people who distribute your products and around the world, as well as obviously the end user. In terms of your use of data and the analytics of that data, is that something that's fundamental to all their activities that you're encompassed on at the moment, or is it much more intuitive than that? Leslie, I think you've frozen. Did you hear me?
Yes, I did. So, sorry, there was a little delay. I think following from what Jeremy was saying, you know, you want to be on top of that data. You need to own the data if you're going to be managing the entire spectrum of the marketing role. I think that what has become apparent in the last few years, and the pressures that we were all debating earlier, is that the board and senior management, investors, they want to hear about marketing effectiveness. They want to make sure that the money that you're spending is delivering an ROI. And in all my recent roles, a lot of the decisions were based on an ROI, and we have to create different approaches and methodologies to be on top of that effectiveness. And I think that the challenge is making your decisions on effectiveness, but also, as Susie very well said, championing the customer at the same time. And it's that constant pressure of the short term and the long term of, you know, driving performance today, but building equity in the future. And ROI is a great measure for sales. In every ROI model that you use, sales comes as a top bill, or you know, some sort of NSV measure, but it is a relationship that you build with a customer over time that will effectively guarantee the longer term of that performance. So therein is the tension. But you cannot nowadays be a successful CMO without being on top of your effectiveness measures and a good knowledge of the data all around your initiatives.
I mean, that brings on to, I guess, the differences between an interim and a full-time role, where as an interim, you might be inclined to focus on those things that you can demonstrate the ROI on more quickly than perhaps you would be if you were a full-time executive like yourself, where you obviously have both short-term needs, technical needs sometimes, as well as the long-term strategic need of the brand. Do you see that happening in the roles that you've performed when you've been fractional or you've been an interim versus a full-time?
I think that the measures of success in an interim role can be very project-based, because you would normally come in with a very clear set of deliverables, with a task at hand that you're expected to implement, you know, within 6 months, within 12 months, 18 months, and there is, I think that there is an obligation to build some rigor into the project that you're in charge of. And I think, although it may not be the longer term payback, you can't actually separate things, I don't think, Stephen, even with a project and looking at what is expected of a program, if it is communications or if it is new product development. At the start of every initiative, there is a set of objectives that to have full ownership and to be able to demonstrate that you be able to demonstrate the results of your intervention, you have to build in a great degree of data, even if it's not the same one that you would have in a longer term project.
Okay. But potentially, we'll come back to that. Potentially, that's one area where there might be a difference of approach versus the long versus the short term. In terms of marketing trends, I mean, Jeremy, stepping back into that role as you have done, I guess has been quite an interesting education. I mean, it's probably things that you've actually learned from the experience that perhaps you weren't aware of a year ago. in general, all of you really, it's kind of an open question. How do you find, given obviously the pace at which change is occurring in our marketplace, both in terms of technology and in terms of the use of different channels, how do you ensure that you stay ahead of that curve? And how do you kind of continue to kind of educate yourself on developing use of new technologies and new approaches to marketing? General question to anyone.
I can jump in first if you like. Just one thing is you can't do it on your own. There's too much. Okay, it depends on the scale of the operation, scale of the client. And there's just so much going on. It's so busy. You'll just do your head in if you try and conquer all. So the key thing is building a strong team around you. It's not obvious things, and making sure you've got some able lieutenants, go-to people, so you can spread the burden. So a core senior marketing team around you, the way you can sort of divide and conquer a little bit, because no way you can bite it all off and chew it. It's not going to work. And a case of understanding what you can achieve short-term, medium-term, long-term. Long-term, you're putting things in place that will probably come to fruition long after your tenure. It's a case of understanding and winning over the senior stakeholders on that mission. Now, a lot of it comes down to the culture, as Susie was saying. Absolutely, what Susie's saying about culture is perhaps one of the most important points. The culture of the organization, the nature of your senior leadership team. Is the CEO an ex-CFO? If he is, he's probably a very left-brain guy or woman, and they're probably going to be very, very comfortable with data and Excel spreadsheets, and far less comfortable with some of the sort of nuanced sort of right-brain stuff that the CMOs like to talk about. Having said that, maybe they're not. Increasingly, in my experience, you're more likely to have a CEO with a CFO background. So you probably have to really balance your left brain with your right brain far more. So understanding those nuances, I think, is critical if you're going to be successful in the battle you're in, and the targets you've set, and the personal KPIs you've set alongside the business and brand KPIs. So my answer really is around the people around you, understanding the key stakeholders, understanding what will win and how to do it over what period. Those are the sort of the building blocks, I suppose, for success, as I see it.
Thank you. Leslie?
I think that your point, Jeremy, on being very conscious on who are you reporting into and what are their strengths and interests is absolutely paramount, and that's how you engage in the conversations in a very positive way. But being the consumer champion and being in a role with the full understanding of your broader responsibilities of educating people as you go along as well. Because you may have a boss who is very comfortable with spreadsheets, doesn't understand equity and consumer behavior, and it is your role to then educate him, her, or everybody else. And I think what is the beauty of being an interim person in this area is that you're often perceived as a troubleshooter. So you come in with a task that you need to resolve, or a project that needs a different approach. And it is the value of bringing this all around perspective into a problem that I think I found very valuable in all my interim roles that I've done in the last 10 years. Is not being so close to the business, is understanding where people are coming from, but offering a much wider perspective and being very confident in doing that. And in my experience, you find that people will come along and that they are interested in things that they didn't know before. And provided you do it in a very tactful way, you just prove your value and are able to progress further and move on with more projects that are related to it. So
okay, so your point is you can't underestimate your role as both a consultant and an advisor when you're in there doing an interim role. Susie, you've changed your roles a couple of times, I think probably 3 times now since you've been at Sage. You moved around the business. One of the critical issues, I guess, when you go into a company on an interim basis is investment you have to make in building those relationships, not just with the people you're reporting to, but the people who are reporting to you. There's always, I guess, an element of, well, she's not going to be here very long, so I don't have to worry about her too much type attitude, potentially, within the marketing teams reporting to you.
Then she
how do you
comes back.
overcome
that? Oh no. Sorry, Nighty, I cut you off.
Yeah. So, I mean, how do you deal with that? I mean, you know, do you get? I mean, yeah, it's a lot of effort that needs to be put in to try and get people to perform, and at the same time, if you're there for a limited period, they can either try and wait for you to go, or they can actually not engage in the same way as they might if you were a full-time employee.
Yeah, so I think probably in all of these conversations, people are the most are the key critical factor, because if you do not, and we've mentioned stakeholders and we've mentioned culture and teams, but you know, organizations are people. They're a whole bunch of human beings. So whatever the tech and data and everything changing, that is the one thing that remains constant, and it's teams that have to do things. So Sage is an interesting one, because I was lucky enough to go in via an old boss who I knew, and with a very specific brief. We were doing a rebrand, a transformation, and it was incredibly hard and lots of change. But because it was sort of it was a very tough time. There was a real deadline. There was a lot to do, a lot of people, a lot of change. It kind of put everyone in it together, and it just had the mentality. And I think sometimes it depends on the project and brief, because if you're going in just as a constant role and stepping in, I sometimes think that's harder. When you're going in, I think Leslie mentioned a specific project, there's a job to be done, you have to very quickly establish relationships, and that's just a pure human thing. You know, there's some things that robots and technology can't do, and that's establishing relationships and understanding people and getting the best out of people and trusting people and earning respect. So I think leaving the role, one of, I think, the most important things to do, and ideally leaving it in a better place than when you started. And a lot of that is to do with how you're leaving the team to carry on and do things. And what's actually been lovely at Sage is to go back and see some of the team that I've recruited and new ones. And there's one girl that I brought on maternity leave and then was off for a year, and then suddenly popped back. And you know, it's one of the loveliest thing for me in their ongoing back is the people and team. And that's different obviously when you're moving jobs, but it's the same principle. It's the key thing. You've got to understand the business objectives clearly, the what, but the how, in terms of inspiring and leading and getting on with the team and helping everyone and doing it together. And that's the team above you as well as the team below you. That is absolutely the critical piece to achieving anything, I think.
Can I add to that? Actually, I completely agree with you, Susie. And also, I think I saw David Moore, you're on the call here. I got this from talking to you the other day. I absolutely agree with you. The danger of being interim is you're seen as a contractor or a consultant. These are bad words because they suggest detachment from the real business, like sort of floating above and not really committed that into the full future of the business. So my point is you need to demonstrate absolute emotional commitment to the job you're doing and absolutely focus on the people, as you say, Susie. No one has ever won an argument or a battle over email, in my experience. You may be more successful over Teams, but you're far more likely to win if you're there in person. So although I was working in a place which had a 2+ policy about going to the office, I went in every day because my boss did. He went in every day, and it meant I had lots of time with my boss, personal coffee time, to understand how he thought, what he thought about things in a less formal format or way than a formal meeting. So trying to win over Teams, trying to win virtually, don't do that. It's all about the people, getting as close as you can to it, physically close, actually in the room with people, and also close, as Susie was saying, when it comes to understanding what makes people tick. This people are your peers, the people you're reporting to, the key stakeholders, and also your team. So you can create traction, particularly in sort of post-COVID times when people are used to hybrid working. Just push against that, I would say, and get as close as you can to the business and the people that matter at all levels.
Russell, I mean, when you are talking to candidates, whether it's interim or full-time now, the people factor, both the people they'll be reporting to and the team they'll be inheriting, do you have similar conversations if it's an interim versus a permanent, or are interims less concerned or worried about that?
I think that companies are generally less concerned about the culture fit when it comes to interims, because, you know, as Leslie said, you're going in to do a specific, often you're going in to do a specific role, whether that's, you know, brand development, proposition, whatever it might be, orchestrate or transformation. And usually what I found is that people will want people who've done that role before in a similar type of organization, as opposed to, well, we want to get the right kind of, you know, personal culture fit and things like that. So, whereas if it's a full-time permanent role, and the perception is that that person is going to be there for more than the you know, the 17 months, that they're in there for the long term, they buy into the goals of the company, and they fit with, and culturally they slot into the existing culture of the senior leadership team, and equally, you know, the people that will be reporting to them, and the wider organization as well.
Okay, I mean, I sense from the answer from Susie that actually she doesn't differentiate in that respect, and that actually you'd embrace talent in the same way whether you were working on a full-time gig or an interim role. Is that fair?
Yes, it is. I completely understand what Russell's saying. I mean, one of my philosophies of life is the beauty of and. The ideal is both, isn't it? That yes, you've got a job to be done. That yes, so having that experience in a short term, that's probably yes. But if that person goes in and just don't fit, so they don't galvanize the team and get on with people and then the job's not going to get done. So I think the ideal is the beauty of the and. Yes, that experience, the what, as I said, but the how, finding the way to fit in. And it may be that at the interim you don't fit, but it's your job to make sure then that you fit into that culture and do the best you can within it, even if it's not your natural home. I think that's probably on you to make sure that you do your best job at adapting, maybe.
Okay. Are there any sort of other major differences between the interim versus the permanent? I mean, we said that actually either way, you need to have a really well-defined set of objectives. You need clarity on roles and responsibility. You need to build that relationship with the people you're reporting to. You need to manage and help develop that team so that when you do, you know, leave that business, whether it's on the interim or full-time basis, you leave them in a better state. What other changes or differences are there between those two roles? Again, anybody on that one?
I think building on what was being said just a moment ago, Stephen, and giving so much of yourself to the team is really important. Even if you are under the label of a temp or a consultant, you have to have an emotional resilience to deal with that, because occasionally you will feel that you don't actually belong and that you really are just a temp. And you have to rise above that and continue to give to the team and continue to drive and be diligent and resilient on what you're doing. Even if you don't get all the emotional reassurance that you would have on a permanent job. You know, even simple things that we're going out for a beer. Oh, nobody bothered asking me. It's like, okay, I'll go home and have wine on my own. You know, depending on where you work, you always be treated as a different one, but it does not stop you from giving. And it's very rewarding at the end of an assignment when you keep in contact with the team that you have developed. And that they come back to you and ask for advice, because there is this trust that was developed because you spend time building that relationship and listening. And what I found is that, you know, being an external point of view, people can be very candid in terms of their career objectives, how they feel, and you have to take all of that in to build that trust and develop the team. But just don't expect things back as you would on a permanent role, because they are often not there. Even from your supervisor, you know, you're here to do a job, thank you very much. And even if they renew your contract several times, you become a bit closer, but you know, you just have to have that maturity in what you do emotionally, I think, being very resilient.
I mean, that's demonstration of success, isn't it? If they do renew that contract, you know, what started out as 3 months becomes 6 months, becomes 9 months, and then before you know it, you've been there 12 months.
Yes.
And I guess you've got to be doing something right, otherwise they wouldn't have extended the contract. Okay, so and Russell, again, do you get feedback from the CMOs that you placed on an interim basis into these organizations that it can be quite a lonely experience unless you fully embrace the culture?
Interestingly enough, no. I think that well, in my experience and the people that I put into those roles, they are they've been doing the role for. I think that they are experienced enough to understand the nuances and the approach of the business, and basically get stuck in. I've not. Thinking about it, I've never had anyone say, well, they're a bit sort of strange or weird, or that I feel a little bit isolated. I think that my impression is that when a company decides that they're taking on an interim CMO, or indeed any other interim role, they acknowledge and respect the role that that person is going to play in the success, in the continued success of the business. So there is that acknowledgement of that person's skills and experience. I've not heard that from anyone in the past. So no, it's a short answer to that.
I think to add to that, Stu, I think you need to be thick-skinned on these things, don't you? And going into these roles, sometimes some people will pigeonhole you as the interim person. But the more attached you can get to the people, the more they can value what you contribute, especially what you're called, the better, yeah? And you prove yourself to be better than the previous person who did your job. As soon as you do that, you start creating solutions to the problems everyone always has, then the title doesn't really matter that much, in my view. It's about emotional attachment and achieving results with them, supporting people where they didn't have support before. I went into a team at Entain, which the previous person hadn't looked after the dressing room very well. And there was a lack of leadership. So it's a case of making sure do your one-to-ones every week, and make sure you listen and care for people, and show all that's obvious stuff. There's some quick wins to be had, I think, and you can win people over. And then the title of what you're called doesn't matter so much, does it? Because what you're contributing and what you're doing.
Yeah. Robin, can I bring you in? You got a question versus longevity versus familiarity.
Yeah, I suppose it's we work with a great deal of CMOs, both interim and permanent, and I guess one of the things that we notice is that an interim or a contractor might have a window of opportunity where you're an outsider, you're new to the business, you can very quickly come to a view as to maybe what you need to do, maybe what's wrong. And as a newcomer, you probably have that license to make a real difference. But that starts to ebb away over time as you build familiarity and you become a bit more a part of the furniture. So really my question was, taking into account where we are in terms of how long people tend to stay in role and contracts being extended and so on and so forth, how long that window of opportunity is, we think, these days?
I'll have a go at this, Stephen, if that's okay. It all depends on your attitude and how you want to relate to the role and the challenge at hand. And I've never ever, even in longer term contracts, forgot that I'm here to provide the business with a fresh pair of eyes, and be very, very honest about things that I see and recommendations that I make. So I've always taken this upon myself to be, the external lens that will add value with a helicopter view rather than becoming part of the furniture. And just reminding people that, you have a different value to add because you have this lots of experience that people around the table probably don't have. So I always try to stay current and not become too comfortable, and I think that has been appreciated. And people saying, well, you don't feel like an interim because you really get stuck in, as Jeremy was saying. So it all depends on your own attitude.
Okay. So actually marketing yourself that way, Leslie, and presenting yourself in a manner that basically demonstrates you're both emotionally and physically committed to doing that job. Thank you very much for the question, by the way. That's important regardless of your role, isn't it? What your title is and whether you are interim, permanent, occasional, or whatever. You've got to basically commit yourself. Otherwise, you're not going to actually add value, and you're not going to be respected, and you won't feel fulfilled, which is, you know, ultimately what we all want, I guess, in the work that we do. One of the benefits of being an interim is the fact that actually you get the opportunity to actually be exposed to all sorts of different businesses, the opportunity to meet obviously all sorts of different people, and that's, you know, the most satisfying part of any role, any job. One of the questions I had, Russell, for you is that when employers are looking for sector experience when it comes to interims, are they as concerned as they would be if they were looking for permanent roles? Is it more about the actual mechanics of what you've got to do? Is, you know, as Susie was saying, she went into a role where it was all about transformation. If she'd done transformation and she had done numerous times in different sectors, the fact she hadn't worked in that sector, was that going to be an impediment to her doing a good job?
No, I think that when it comes to placing permanent CMOs, it's very much about, as I said, essentially said earlier, the breadth and nature and the objectives of the marketing within that business. So if it's very sort of customer led, for instance, then someone has been exposed in any particular sector, which is very you know, a very customer led business. If there is an opportunity or there is a requirement to do something around the brand proposition, then and that is more the emphasis of the role, then it doesn't necessarily mean they could come from any sort of from anywhere, as long as they've fulfilled that particular function. It's whatever I think it's whatever the priority is, and I always think that there, you know, what I try and understand is, you know, what are the priorities of the CMO of that particular or indeed of any role, senior role within an organization. You know, what are the sort of the key things that they are looking for that person to actually fulfill, and usually in what timescale as well, because that will determine, you know, the type of person or the skill sets that I will be identifying for that opportunity, and then taking into account afterwards, you know, the sort of make sure that the individual has the same values, and is on a similar trajectory that in terms of, you know, their career, and the business as well. You're looking at quite a lot of different factors when it comes to a permanent role, whereas with an interim, again, you know, the key focus is, you know, what is the number one thing that you require that person to do, and if it's a more of a people role, you know, sort of sort out the structure, then you're looking for people who've worked in often companies which have larger teams, so that they know kind of, you know, where to place these people, what makes a good head of CRM, what makes a good loyalty person, a good performance marketer, etc. So it depends, but generally, yeah.
Okay. No, that's what I may have assumed. Julie, you asked a couple of questions. I think you're one of the panel. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Hi everybody. I've worked a lot as an interim and fractional CMO, particularly focused on transformation agendas, and I was really interested in the way you were talking about perceptions around the title of interim. Really keen to understand if you think there's an opportunity to reposition the term interim, because it feels to me as though fractionals become perceived as being quite cool. Interim still has some of those connotations of, you know, second best to a permanent CMO. So really interested in your thoughts.
I completely agree with you. Interim is it's slightly dirty association with interim as it can be, because as in not proper. But I think about like interim often it can be a sort of fractional interim or a permanent interim. My recent thing has been 100% interim, but 100% fractional. Clearly, it's one of many gigs you're currently on. It's a fraction of your site, clearly. So there's a key difference there. It is cooler, isn't it? Say fractional, because you have fractional CFOs for ages, and fractional CMOs have really come in, talked about a lot more now the last 2 or 3 years. So, but fractional suggests that you're also focused on other businesses beyond the CMO gig you're on. So it could create some confusion. I mean, everyone knows what interim is. It's just a case of the name, the word itself has a sort of weakness to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think it
which is the
comes
issue.
back to, sorry, I think Russell was talking. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it links back as well to what you were saying around what's expected, because for me, you know, I've had assignments where it's super clear what you're there to do, and you know, if that is a big transformation piece, that has a certain perception around it where, you know, I think as Leslie was saying, your expertise and your broader expertise and experience is then, you know, perceived as being something really specific that's needed by the business for a period of time, which elevates the perception of the role. So I think a lot of it to me is back to that clarity on contracting and what you're really there to do. But yeah,
I agree completely. Yeah.
Well, you're creative people. We'll have to come up with a new term that we all feel better describes what we are about. As David said, interim was relevant 20 years ago when assignments were all going that way, and maybe it's no longer the relevant term. So we'll have to reinvent that. That said, of course, I think a lot of boards are still struggling with the actual concept of what a CMO is. So it might be a challenge. We've obviously got a few moments left. I wanted to move it on if I can, and to talk a little bit about pricing and talk about also how about one goes about getting these opportunities. Should we start with actually the job seeking side, to all of you and to anyone on this call, in terms of how do you find interim roles or permanent roles? What's the normal route to market for you? Susie, Leslie, anyone?
Okay, well, I wasn't going to answer because I'm probably a bad example. Because my own marketing, as you will know, is very rubbish. And anyone that looks at and tries on my LinkedIn and website, which I don't have one. However, I have been very lucky. Nearly all of my work has come from referrals or continuing work. I mean, us back, and I think it comes back to the people point and Leslie's point in terms of attitude and going into a role. So going into any role, heart and soul, doing the best for that business, you are in that role. So whether you're interim, whether you're acting, I think was a acting EVP, acting, which is a bit of a weird one as well, but interim sounds like a fill-in, doesn't it? Rather, or you're just here for just a fill-in job. But whatever you are called, and I'm now thinking what that rebrand should be. Whatever you're called, I think you just go in to do the job as if you're going to be there forever. That you're going in as CMO. That's what you're doing, and you make the decisions based on that, the best for the business and the people, for the long term and the short term, balancing it, relationships. That to me, it's that simple. So it's slightly off question, but I think if you do, I think you are more likely to get asked back and referred on, which has been my route to market, because I'm not good at marketing myself.
Leslie, what about you? How do you get your gigs, Leslie?
100% through my network and people I know. So even if you're applying for a job, you will find somebody who knows somebody where that job is related to. So it's just the power of people you know and people who have a good thing to say about you, as Susie said. You know, it's your reputation that opens doors. But I think that if you're starting off, it is about relying on the network first, and not shying away from asking. You know, not always letting things come to you. You know, you can be very proactive in that search through your network as well.
I agree with that. I mean, all of mine's been referral as well, and absolutely you need to spin all the plates. So use your network, and your network is an ever-expanding thing, and you need to freshen your network and talk to new people about where the fish are swimming and all that stuff. So for me, it's a case of it's keeping all your options open. So all my work through my consultancy and also this last CMO gig is through people I know. It's exactly the way that Leslie talked about: a good reputation, a good word spoken to somebody who's in the market looking for somebody, and it's referred on from a respected person, and you're sort of in. But clearly, that's you can't necessarily rely on that, because there are a lot of people looking for interim jobs now, fractional jobs. So for me, it's about talking to people in market, like Russell, like David Moore on the call, who know the market and who know where you're most likely to get a bite when you fish. So it's keeping all the options open, I think. So you give yourself your best chance. It's scary, but that's, in my experience, the best way of doing it.
Yeah, I agree, Jeremy. I think that from my experience, just talking to when I ask people when they're doing interim roles, how did you hear about the role in the first place? It's 80% of the time, maybe even higher, word of mouth, network, their own personal network. And that's why I think that yeah, people like myself we do pick up these opportunities from time to time, but usually they go under the radar. It's because the CEO knows someone who knows someone, and the person gets the job, basically. And I think it's really
well, you've all got none of you got excuses not to come to our next 6 PM club then. But yeah, networking is key to all of this. I'd like to, we're now sort of tying things up. We had a fantastic session which David Moore led a couple of weeks ago. It's up on the screen there. If you actually copy that link to the session we ran, some really interesting insights for all CMOs. So I would certainly suggest, if you haven't already seen it or you didn't attend that particular session, you did take the opportunity to have a look at it. One of the things that David spoke about, and he's on the call today, was actually about pricing. David, can I just bring you in very quickly in the last minute, just to kind of talk about how candidates, how people should basically look at pricing in an interim marketplace?
Yeah, hi, Stephen. In terms of the day rate calculations, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. The issue is that there's quite a lot of bad advice out there. You can pick up websites and see their day rate calculators on there, and they tend to use an equation which is take your salary at 30% and divide it by 220 days, and that gets you to your day rate. Don't do that. Ignore that advice. That is for more juniors, and you'll be under invoicing by about a third. I'm sure most of you know that there is an accepted rule of thumb in the sector, which is 1%. The day rate is 1% of the equivalent salary. So if you were to take a salary of 150,000, if you use the 30% rule, you finish up at 886. Take the 1% rule, and you finish up at 1,500. So that 1% rule is largely acknowledged, not always accepted, but largely acknowledged by the interim community, the interim service providers, and indeed the clients as well. I've had 17 assignments over 18 years and always used the 1% rule. So I think that's a key learning for us that are the more senior, I suppose, of the interim.
Thank you very much indeed for that. So that we're leaving on a very positive note. First of all, thank you to all of our panel for their time today. Thank you very much for joining us. I suspect we could go on and talk for another hour or so. There's an awful lot more we could have discussed, so I'm sure we'll come back to the subject in the future. If you are a CMO or a senior marketer looking for a fresh challenge, please do drop me a line. We're always very excited to talk to people and help people find their next opportunity, either through the Pimento network or working closely with Russell. If you're interested in finding more about what Pimento does and its marketing services proposition, then please do drop me an email at Stephen with a ph.knight@pimento.co.uk. Otherwise, I will leave you to your interim or permanent days. Thank you for your time, and thanks once again to our panel. This video will be available by tomorrow, and we will be sharing it also on social over the next few weeks. So if you're on camera, thank you for coming on camera. It's always lovely to see your faces. And we look forward to talking to you in the very, very near future. So thanks again to the panel. Have a cracking day.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.